So
The candle's right there.
all right. Hey everyone, how we doing? I'm going to give us just a couple more minutes. We're about half of our group is here. I want to make sure we've got everybody, and then we'll start the party. Okay, we are a little past 5 o'clock, and I know it's going to be a robust conversation. So I think we'll get ourselves started. Robust is the term they use in diplomacy. I think you know that I monitored the shared document through last night and most of the day today, and I've printed out actually the latest version that I could. So I've got that here in front of me. As you went through that, I did offer, with no acceptors, to have a couple of you try to summarize what where you were headed, and so, but we haven't really done that, so we're going to do that this evening, and committed to coming up with a recommendation to take to the board by the time we're done at 6:30. I have been asked to attend remotely a board meeting tentatively scheduled for next week to deliver your recommendation. So before we're done here, I'm going to make sure that I have your recommendation as you want it to read. I want to talk a little bit about, as you know, I've tried to keep us on a fairly narrow path here. And so I want to talk a little bit about my best version of what metrics are. And I'm happy to hear some feedback on that. But I don't want to restrict us too much. I also don't want to get us going beyond the scope of the request. So I do believe that a metric, some of you have talked about just making a decision for a period of time. In other words, we go into X through Christmas or January or whatever it is. My view is that is potentially a metric. It's a date, but it's a metric. So I'm going to allow for that discussion. I'm not sure how the district will respond to it, but I'm just making a judgment call that's potentially a metric that we can discuss. There has been discussion about, do we use CDC metrics, Southwest District metrics? I don't know if there's a significant difference between the two. I sent each of you a copy of the CDC's, they don't call them guidelines, the indicators is the word that CDC uses for schools. You should have that in your inbox. If not, we can refer to it. But I think obviously we need to, as we get through this, we're going to have to get down to the specifics of what metrics we're going to discuss and eventually recommend. There has been some discussion about one set of metrics for elementary and one set of metrics for secondary. I know that there are districts that have done that. I think it's entirely appropriate if you want to ultimately make that kind of a recommendation. I believe that falls under our purview. The question that would arise is how that would be viewed by the association. I don't know, Eric, if you want to weigh in on that at all, but that's just a consideration that would have to be understood.
Yeah, I don't know that. I'm not certain what part of the contract is being referred to as being in conflict in that regard, because the contract really is about working conditions. So I can't say that at this point. I'd probably have to do further study with the contract, but at this point, I can't think of any reason why that necessarily creates a conflict in terms of contract language.
So given that, and given how I'm interpreting it, that's an open discussion for us to have this evening. The other thing that's been talked about a lot on the shared site was there are a multitude of unforeseeable and foreseeable consequences with any recommendation and ultimately any decision. Yes. Having to do with breakfast and lunch, having to do with all of the healthcare workers who suddenly have children at home, and it speaks to the true vexing nature of this of why this is so difficult and why every district in the state, for that matter in the country, is struggling with it. So ultimately, however, that I hate to put it this way, but that ultimately is the board's problem and the board's issue. And so what we have to do is make a recommendation, understanding that it comes that coming with that are these other consequences that will have to be dealt with. And the board can simply hear our recommendation and say thanks, but no. We all know that as well. So with that introduction, I'm going to just sort of open the floor, and we're going to do this the same way we've done in the past. Just raise your hand and I'll get to you. But I want to open the floor. I hope that the process with the conversation online has moved the needle a bit. And I don't want to start out going way into the weeds, because, you know, an hour and a half goes by pretty quickly. But I want to open the floor for sort of opening comments, thoughts. Keep them as brief as you can, but let's just hear from anyone who wants to start with where you're at. Let's start with Nathan.
So it seems like a lot of our discussion on the document has not been based around which metrics, but how to set the percentages and numbers of the metrics to get it to work correctly. And so I have a feeling that's where our discussion should be headed, is just discussing, you know, what percentage of teachers out does it take for us to start looking at red? What percentage of students, what percentage of subs, you know, how many weeks do we need of downward trend to go back to hybrid? Those sorts of numerical things seem to be one of the things that was discussed quite a bit.
So I will be getting to the rest of you. I just want to comment on that. That operates on a presumption that the metric we're going to use is an internal sort of metric, having to do with students out, personnel out, bus drivers out, that kind of thing, as opposed to an external metric, which would be red, orange, yellow, that sort of thing. And again, I think that's within your purview, but for what it's worth. Okay. I saw some heads nodding that I think we all understand that. Adam?
I was just going to say that I think we should talk about those internal metrics, but understand that they really are symptoms of operating in red. So the staffing issues fluctuate, and right now are becoming an issue. We have less staff because the virus levels are so high. So when we try to operate in red as we are, we're having staffing issues. So what we can expect is if that trend keeps going up with the virus, then we will have more staffing issues. And if the virus goes down, then I think we would expect fewer staffing issues, just like when we were in orange. So as the virus increases, those metrics increase, we're just going to continue to have those. I mean, we have 5 schools closed already. So those metrics remain relevant is all I'm trying to say, those Southwest District Health red.
Okay, got you. Kyler next, and then Biff, I see you, and we'll just keep going. Kyler?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I agree. I think that the metrics need to be centered toward what we can and cannot do. I think that maybe one external metric, one of the big takeaways for me from the bringing in the professionals, epidemiologists, was that we are not the driving force in the community. The reality is the school is, you know, they use the term microcosm, they talk about it a number of ways, but we're not the driving force. Shutting down schools will not dramatically impact the number of COVID cases throughout the community. I think given that's why we've all pushed towards an internal metric to say, can we operate schools or can we not operate schools? Do we have students? Do we have staff? I think the one exception to that we may want to consider as an external metric is sort of beyond that red, orange, yellow is the governor saying, go to, you know, and I don't remember what the stages are, 1, 2, 3, 4, When we go to the worst of those metrics, when he's saying parents stay home, then I think right now he's in stage 2 and specifically says this does not mean we need to close schools. Obviously, our own metrics tell us when we need to close schools, but I think there also needs to be a metric externally that says if parents stay home, whether that's from a governor, whether that's from a mayor, whether that's from a county, whatever the county official is, I apologize. When parents stay home, the kids can stay home too. That we have to be able to support the community, because we're not going to drive, I hate puns, but we're not going to drive the bus in this.
Okay. Biff, I see you, Brooke. I've got you on my list.
So when we're talking about staff and the amount of staff that we have, and if we get to a certain amount, I guess I worry that we have staff catching it now. We're in hybrid, and I guess I don't see, if we go to hybrid now, or if we go online now, we are still at home, but that doesn't mean that teachers stay in their houses and don't go out and get it however they're getting it now. So really, having us go online doesn't change the fact or help that teachers are getting it, because I guess I didn't see the data that teachers are getting it from their students. They're getting it from outside, and then they're having to quarantine. So either way, teachers will be getting it, but closing the school doesn't affect that. So I guess I'm worried about that.
Okay. Christy is next.
Yeah, I kind of had that same thought that Biff had. And when we first started, I was very, very strong. Like, when we're in the red, we should be strictly online. But the past week, the more information we've had, the more I've been thinking about it. Even though we've kind of gone back to stage 2, I'm starting to lean a little bit more towards, we need to come up with something that maybe what metrics do we come up with so that, you know, we can stay online as long as, or do the hybrid as long as we can while we're in stage red, until we need to go back into the online. I just kind of feel like at this point, if the state and our community is still going out and we're still staying open as a community, then is it really going to help to go back strictly online? I just don't know if that's really the answer at this point. And I know if it comes to a point where we can't fill with subs, and if there's a certain percentage out of teachers and students, then it may come to that point. And I feel like maybe that's the metric that we need to come up with.
Let me ask all of you just to consider something before I've got Brooke next, and then Nathan, then Adam. So I'm keeping track of who's raised their hand. Where would you all put continuity, the idea of continuity of something that is stable? Where would you put that on how high a priority is that? And I'm not going to ask for a vote on that, but I see that a lot in what you've been talking about in your conversation, and that sense of stability and continuity implies a certain approach versus one approach versus another. Just something to ponder as we get around to all this. Okay, Brooke.
So I first of all, I really appreciate that we're looking at the metrics from within the school, and I just love that. I'm super proud of the progress that the group has made. The other thing I wanted to say is, Biff, I really hear you about your school. Like, I read a lot of what you said, and it really speaks to me. And so I wanted to throw something out because I love our metrics in the school. Gosh, I have this large parent group, and I'm really for opening the schools, echoing a lot of what we heard from Christy, right? Like, the schools are safe. One of the things that is really speaking to me, though, is that our infrastructure at this moment doesn't seem to be prepared for what we're doing. And that is probably the biggest takeaway that I've had from this group. The other thing is just so you guys know, so in my parent group, I have roughly almost 1,000 parent and teachers. Like, I get a lot of comments. And the community has really enjoyed our board because we're kind of evaluating these metrics. So my hope is, Roger, that one of the suggestions that we can make after we define our metrics is, I think what really came up, you guys, is there's a lot of metrics that we need to talk about or we would be willing to discuss, like the quarantine thing. I see the comment, I thought that too. Biff, you make a huge case for why it's important for your school to be open during the holidays. I mean, that got me, so thank you. So I'm hoping that when we come up with our metric, we still send in those suggestions that say we're running into a lot of issues because it's an all or nothing, when we're really discovering that we have targeted issues. And I think that that's important to pay homage to. And I know it doesn't meet the metrics, but I just have to say that because we're finding that there's so many things wrong within the metric we have. That was it.
So just to address that, my intention is, one, to deliver the request, which is, the metrics to determine hybrid versus online, and then to include a summary of comments and other suggestions. Even though that's not inside our specific mandate, I don't see any problem with. I mean, we put in this work. We've gotten a lot of information, so I'll gather that and submit it with the official recommendation. Nathan, you had your hand up a bit ago. You still?
Yeah. So this is just a clarification on how I sort of built those metrics. And this isn't to be insensitive, but I didn't build the metrics to keep anyone safe. That's not what we had talked about. We had talked about, can the schools function? So when we're talking about staying home between Thanksgiving and Christmas, that's not because I think teachers are going to be really smart about it and not get themselves infected. They very well could. But we're just at a point where I don't think we can continue in this way. And so all of those metrics about percentages of, when do we shut down, that's about, can we handle this? It's not about, is this safe for our teachers, or, are we going to keep them from getting the disease? Because as we've seen, it's not in our schools as much as it is the community. The schools are safer than the community.
Okay, Kim, I see you. Adam's going to be next, and then it'll be to you. So Adam.
So I just wanted to clarify that quarantining is a big issue. Whether or not someone catches the virus, if they're exposed, they have to quarantine and are out for, 2 weeks or longer. So I've got plenty of students, including 2 today, who are going to be out for at least 2 weeks. So quarantining teachers can still teach online, and quarantining students can still have access to a teacher live online. So I just wanted to clarify about that. And then really quickly, I saw lots of concerns about consistency on the document. And it seems to me that if we're being reactive by closing schools when, not like, what did they close the other 2 with 2 days notice? That to me is less consistent than saying, okay, we're going to be online until the metrics are in a downward trend. And that is something that we can be looking at given that 2-week period or 3-week period, which was discussed on the document. So I just wanted to clarify about quarantining, and then just say that to me, being reactive in closing school by school does not seem consistent.
Okay. Kim?
I also earlier wanted to agree with what Nathan was saying. Right now, our amount of exposure right now that we're getting throughout the community, and it has gone within our schools. And so I wanted to reiterate that, yeah, right now we don't have, with everything that's happening, we don't have the ability to keep the schools open. As you saw, we have 5 schools closed in 2 days. And so if we could, that suggestion of staying closed remotely until mid-January, until we see a downward trend, in which Adam said is a good possibility for this process. And then, yeah, discussing the school by school basis after that, that might be the case in which we start discussing maybe the primary versus the secondary metrics in that case, because we know that the possibility, and I can't, like I said earlier in our previous meeting, I can't speak from an elementary school perspective, but the high schools are getting a lot more cases because the kids are going out in the community and also having jobs and bringing it back in. So our secondary metrics might look a little different than our primary metrics, and they might be able to stay in a little bit longer, but maybe there's still a fine line. There's still a fine line that we need to know, that where our community is here, that we need to make sure that we can't stay open anymore because we have too much of a trend going up, something's happening, and it's just not safe.
Okay, thank you. Kyler?
Oh, I was just going to comment on the idea of consistency. Obviously, consistency would be great, but I think on a scale of kind of where does that lie? I personally, I'm going to say that it's got to lie relatively low for me. I think, the reality is educating our students. I'll take a step back at this one and say, a long time ago, somebody made the argument of if we can just save one life by keeping people home, then it's all worth it. That's simply not true, because if we keep people home, yes, we can save a life, and we can also take a life. We can drive a kid to suicide, to gangs, to violence, to drugs, to underage sex, to whatever that negative metric is that definitively we know. We have shown statistically hundreds and hundreds of times that there is a correlation between being in school and staying away from negative impact, fill in the blank. So I think that has to be a very high priority for us. The idea of consistency, I mean, snow days. I as a parent, I would rather get notification at 6 o'clock in the morning that says, hey, we're gonna not have school today, or we're gonna have school today. Get your kids dressed and get them to school. That's me personally. And I get it. Snow days are going to happen 2 times in a year if we're lucky. If our kids are lucky. This is going to happen more often than that, and I understand the difference. But I think that consistency has to be a lower factor than other factors. Okay,
thank you. We're still sort of in general, sense of the group mode. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that before I start to move us toward more specific topics? I will draw your attention to the chat box. There is a sort of some side conversation going on there, and I think it's worth following that. And if I see something that I think needs to be discussed openly, we can, well, not openly, but with the group, we can certainly do that. Let me start with this, see if I can get a sense of the group on the appropriateness of separate metrics for the elementary versus secondary. So let me just try this. Those who would be in favor of establishing or discussing in great detail the different metrics for secondary versus elementary, just raise your hand. Or put it in front of the camera so I can see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. We're about half and half. How many of you are in favor of a process that considers more strongly internal metrics versus external metrics? So those of you who think internal metrics are the more important of the numbers, raise your hand. Half and half. Not quite half and half, but close. So how many of you would favor some kind of a mixture of internal and external metrics? Hand up. Okay, almost everybody. So we're going to get really complicated. That's good. Sometimes that's what it takes. Okay, so well, here's what my current takeaway is, that there is a sense of the group that you want to discuss and create metrics that consider both internal and external numbers. Okay, Eric, did you have I see your mute off. Did you have a comment? Okay. How many of you are interested in talking about metrics that are just calendar related? We're gonna go X for a certain period of time. Hands up. Okay. Thank you. Let's turn our attention then to the discussion of what set of internal metrics we want to consider, what set of external metrics we want to consider, and how they might connect. Okay, so let's start with a discussion of internal metrics, meaning staffing levels from schools to bus drivers to what have you, to the number of cases, the number who are quarantined, that sort of internal metrics that have to do with school. We're also going to need to discuss, is it school to school or is it district wide when you talk about those kinds of metrics, right? So I'm going to open the floor back up for that conversation. Nathan, I see you. Kim, I see you. Kyler.
Sorry to be the quick one, guys. I think when we're discussing internal metrics, we should really have two types of metrics. We should have a metric that talks about the whole district, or metrics that talk about the whole district. But we should also provide metrics so that individual schools can shut down with the hope of keeping the rest of us going. If one school needs a ton of subs, have them shut down for 2 weeks so those subs can go to other schools and try to keep those schools afloat. Things like that. So the metrics that I would be most interested in are percentage of teachers who cannot be in the school teaching, and percentages of students who cannot be in the school learning, that would both benefit from being online.
And I heard you say, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that you prefer a school to school versus district-wide approach.
No, I think we should do both. We should have a district-wide approach metric, and then we should also have a school-to-school metric so that some schools can shut down. But then if enough schools are meeting the district qualifications, then we just all shut down. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Kim.
He took the words out of my mouth. So that's exactly what I was going to say, that I would like to see both of those. And then also, don't forget, we need to figure out when we're in red, when we're in orange. Are we still using Southwest District Health data in that court case? We should be. Okay, so in the red, what are we doing? In the orange, what are we doing? Obviously in the orange, we're in hybrid, but do we do a school to school basis? In that case, if there's too many schools going out, then like Nathan said, there's too many schools going out even in the orange, do we meet the metrics of our school district wide? Do we need to shut down?
So yes, that your point is well taken. So one, we decide which external metrics we're going to use. Presumably it's Southwest District, but I want to hear from you. And then if you haven't achieved, if we're not at that level district wide, but a school reaches there, so that's part of our conversation. Kyler, I saw your hand up, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. A couple of things I think that we need to look at. One, a direct comment to Kim, and I appreciate the comment, but I disagree. I think that whether in red or orange, if we meet the internal metric, then we shut down, right? And I think you got to that same point. If we're in orange, is the metric different than if we're in red? My personal opinion is if we meet our internal metric, we shut down. Simple as that.
For what it's worth, I think that's what I heard Kim say is that.
Okay, and I think that's where she got. I just wanted to voice that as well. And the other side to it, I think, agreeing with Nathan's comments in terms of a perfect application of, if we have X number of schools that cannot stay open, then district closes. I think it's as simple as that. The other question that I have, though, is when we look at each of the metrics, sub rates, teachers out, students out, busing, what's the linchpin right now? And is that a consistent linchpin? If that's the case, then that simplifies our metric. We can, if busing has never been a problem, then let's not waste our time making a metric on busing.
The other thing I would just suggest is it has to be a metric that is actually being tracked by the district. I mean, and so there may be some things that that the district just isn't currently tracking or isn't in a position to track, and so we need to make sure that whatever we select, it's available to us. Biff is next, and then Brooke.
Sorry, I was just going to agree with Kim, what she was talking about. And then Kyler also, I do believe that the internal metrics are going to be more important. But I'd also like to make sure that we're, when we divide the schools, instead of just elementary and secondary, I know I sound like a broken record, but those that can cohort and socially distance versus those that can't. Those would be the two distinctions versus secondary and primary.
Okay, I think I'm hearing that quite a bit. Brooke?
I just want to make sure one of our metrics is total attendance, because I know that we have a lot of parents not sending their kids right now at all because we are in red. And even if that's not how I feel as a parent, parents do feel that way. So I do believe we have to look at total number of attendance overall, sick or not.
Okay, thank you. Adam?
I agree with Biff, and that was something that had not occurred to me until he brought it up in the document. So I appreciate that there are, in his case, there is a secondary school that can cohort. So I agree with Biff as far as discussing who can cohort and who can't. Just from my point of view as a teacher at East Valley Middle School, I've got any number of kids going to any number of combination of classes once they leave my room. So there's just no way to cohort with the way that our middle school is set up.
I need to ask a stupid question. Can you define for me the word cohort as a verb?
What I understand that to be is that students are set up in groups and do not interact closely with another set of students who are cohorted differently. For example, it would be as if my students never interacted with students outside my classroom. But in my case, there is no cohorting. So students in my class go into any number, they stream into any number, matriculate into any number of other classes, which means they're not cohorted.
Okay, so again, I want to go back. I see you, Kyler. I want to go back and just again, I think about the impact on the administrative process, and at the end of the day, we need to be able to provide a recommendation that is doable for the administration to follow, and that the metrics are something that either are easily collected or are currently being collected. Kyler, I think I saw your hand go up.
Actually, no, it was covered by Adam. So I'm good.
Okay, any other general comments before I start to what the next step here is? I'm going to start asking you for the specific internal metrics that you want to use. Are we ready to go on to that? New sheet of paper.
I was just going to say really quickly, a majority of our elementary schools can cohort. My school's actually K-8, but we have full cohort abilities at the elementary level. So what may be really helpful for the board when they get all this is a list of the middle or high schools who have the ability to cohort that could be added to that cohort list versus non-cohort.
Let me
is hard to
ask
say.
Another dumb question here. So let's say that a school can cohort. I've never used that as a verb, but okay. It's past a metric that we've decided is at a level that takes us to hybrid or online only. If that school has crossed the number the target we've set, but it can cohort, does that matter? I don't know.
I think in the chat, Chandra brought up an important point that parents may have. Some students who are able to cohort and some students who are unable to cohort, depending on the school they attend. I just thought I'd say that.
And I don't know. Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, that makes a good point. I'm not sure. I mean, if we can't staff the building, then who cares if they can cohort because we don't have teachers. So,
I think that's where I'm at, is that if you've got staffing issues, you've got staffing issues, right? I mean,
yeah, so it depends on if the metric is internal or external. If we were using external metrics as our primary source, then whether or not they could cohort would be really important. But since we're using, seemingly, if we choose to use primarily internal metrics, then it doesn't really matter.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Did I see a hand somewhere? Brooke, yes. And then Kim.
I just want to remind everybody that we're in a situation that makes it really hard to be equitable for all, right? We just are. I've thought about this for days, but one of the things I want to point out from my parent group, if you're a parent and you have 2 kids in secondary and 2 kids in primary, it actually causes a little bit more stress if you're willing to send your kids, because then you're teaching 4 kids, 4 separate schools. So I do believe if we can establish a metric where, we have some that can attend, some that can't, we won't. But then the other thing I wanted to throw out, just so that we are aware, I know we shut down the term or like the month, like we shut that down right away, or like the 2 weeks after like a vacation. I do want to remind everybody that as far as I'm aware, the CARES Act funding for COVID relief pay does expire in December unless something new is passed. And so I'm thinking a lot of different ways than I have before, because I've talked to so many teachers who are also looking for solutions, and I've greatly appreciated that. But I wanted to throw that out too as like a nugget for us to consider as well.
Okay, thank you. Kim?
It was answered. One of the things she said was one I was going to say. So that's good.
Love it when that happens. All right, let's get specific about internal metrics. What makes sense? Nathan?
We've been talking about a certain percentage of staff being gone from a school, leading to that school shutting down, and then a certain number of schools leading to the district shutting down. The percentages I've seen have been anywhere from 10 to 20%. And based on our sub rates, I put 20% in the document. I also put 15 in there at one point, just because that seems to be where our subs can no longer cover everything. And so that seems to be where we hit that crucial point.
Yeah, so I saw that conversation, and there was 10 and there was 20, and then there was some conversation about just compromising at 15.
Yeah. I'm totally open to what anyone has to say on that issue.
Adam?
I did see Chandra's hand before mine, but I just wanted
Oh,
to say,
sorry, Chandra. I'll get right to you.
I was just wondering, I didn't know where that 10 to 20% metric came in, and I don't know what is the district's linchpin. I know somebody asked that before. At what point does it begin to crumble? Is 15 too high? I would caution us to be too liberal with the high number of subs, or saying we can push this.
Okay, thank you, Chandra.
Thanks, Adam, for pointing that out. My question was along the line of Adam's as well. In the document, it seems like everybody was kind of on a general consensus of using an internal metric that had to do with staffing and how many kids are absent. And not being a person who works inside the school, I didn't know whether the 10, 15, or 20, if those were arbitrary numbers, or what is the school district currently operating at outside of COVID? What of those numbers, and maybe some of the teachers in the group have a better sense of what that number is. I just want to caution us from choosing arbitrary numbers that really don't mean a whole lot.
Good point. Thank you. At some point, if we wish, we can get feedback while we're meeting from the district. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. Eric, you were next. You're muted.
I am. I have some numbers that will help with that, if you will indulge me just a moment to find that. So the district is operating right now. Their starting point for shutting down schools because of staffing is at 15% in the secondary and 20% in the elementary. So that's just starting point, right? Some elementary schools have more support staff that they can move into classrooms than others. So some of the larger schools, or some of the schools that are higher in Title I, may be able to have a little bit higher percentage in that regard. The percentage of subs available in the district, typically they are covering about 60 jobs district-wide per day as an average with subs. And then the other thing I think to note is that of our certificated staff district-wide, there are about 850 certificated staff that deliver instruction on a regular basis. And so even 10% of that would be 85, which is well above the threshold that the district is able to cover with subs at this point.
Okay, I'm tempted to, let me see if I can get some clarification for my own understanding. So right now, if a school hits 15% unavailable staff, is that school being taken online?
In secondary, yes, and that number is closer to 20% in the elementary.
And that's already occurring within the district.
That has been the policy that has set these closures over the last few days. Yes.
Okay. All right.
There are other mitigating factors there as well, like the ability to move other staff into the classrooms.
Well, and so you indirectly raised the point that as we go forward, we want to be careful not to handcuff the district or the people making decisions too much, right?
Oh, sure.
Kim, I see you, Brooke.
Well, sorry, I was thinking about that. Are those metrics that were presented to us? So is it just something that the school district themselves right now are just using as a metric themselves to shut down? Or was that, because I don't remember seeing that in our actual metrics that were ever presented to us. And so I don't know if maybe we wasted our time saying some of the stuff that we were trying to put together, if it's something that they've already been doing.
Sorry, I just recently requested that information from our assistant superintendent, and that's who that came from.
Okay, so they already kind of have I don't know for sure if they already have a true idea, like step by step. So I don't know if, so teachers, and then I was going to also mention attendance overall as students. We definitely need to make sure like attendance overall as students and who is attending. So we already kind of understand teachers and the school district's already doing that. So we can just say, go ahead and do those same similar metrics that they're doing, but then attendance rate as well. Right now, like I've said last time, is when we see our students in person in the high school level specifically, we're only seeing about a 72% attendance rate. And right now we're seeing them hybrid. So our high schools, we're supposed to see roughly 600 kids a day, and we're only seeing 72% attendance rate in that case. And I'm just doing a ballpark 600. I know one school's 1,400 students, one's 1,100 students. I'm just doing a ballpark 600 students. And so what's happening is we're seeing roughly 1 in 4 kids choosing not to come to school, and it could be quarantined. It could be my kid, I don't feel like it's safe for my kid to attend school. We get calls like that every single day. We have kids that are getting out sick. We have kids that are going out, their parents saying that they are quarantining their kid feels sick, but we're quarantining them for 14 days, but we're not going to get them tested. And so we're seeing that every single day. And so I would say that our next big metric we need to look at is once we start seeing a certain percent, I think we had a less than 80% on our group. If we see a less than 80% attendance rate, that we might need to see what we can do so that teachers can provide as much instruction to kids as possible, if that makes sense.
What I would add here with regard to your initial comment, whether the district is currently acting in a certain way or not, our charge has been to make recommendations. And if you want to in some way confirm a current policy by your recommendation, there's no reason not to do that. So
and I would say that probably the 15 to 20%, which is what we all agreed on, would probably be that metric for teachers, which you could see in our document.
We're going to have that discussion about the specific number here in a moment. Let me get to Brooke.
So I'm just wondering, because we are talking so specific, and I don't want to tie the district because they are going to know what school can function in which way. Maybe our metric can be a bit more broad. And then the other thing that I want to say is that I don't know that we ever function again in a way where we don't have positive cases in a school. So some of what we are seeing has already happened for other businesses or the community because they were open first. So part of this is I think the process too of how do we live in a pandemic? And so maybe with the metrics being a bit broader and having those suggestions long-term, it kind of goes back to we have to be malleable because we don't know what tomorrow, if I got ate by a giant chicken tomorrow, I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be like, oh, it's 2020, that's what, right? So I do want to make sure that we remain malleable. That's probably just the business owner in me because this pandemic has thrown things that nobody's ever seen, ever. So just making sure that we know that. So maybe sometimes that a little bit broad is okay if we just talk about the targeted closures, the secondary, schools closing when they can no longer functionally or sustain being open.
I'm not gonna include, this is just a judgment I'm gonna make. I'm not going to include being eaten by a chicken as part of the metric. I just don't think that's going to go over. Nathan.
If the district already has a metric in place for closing down schools, I wonder if our metric should simply be the number of schools we think should have to be closed before the whole district closes down. Seems like we could pick a number that makes sense and go from there.
Okay, thank you. Kim?
And I like that, but also don't forget the external, where is our community as a whole? Okay, we need to also understand where does Southwest District Health put us? If as a community as a whole, we still got to find a time in which we do, our community is way too sick. We still got to find a spot where we're going to draw a line and say, hey, our community is not doing what we need them to do to safely keep schools open. And since we are a microcosm of the community, we need to make sure that we try to make sure that we have the least amount of exposure in our community for our healthcare workers and our possibility of our hospital beds and all of that going too far out of control. So we do, I think at some point we still need to find where is it still unsafe for all schools to be open on an external part as well.
Yeah, I promise you that when we're done going through the internal metrics, we're going to tackle the external as well, and presumably that would be regardless of what's happening internally. If these external metrics are hit, then X happens. Let me go to Biff. I think I've seen all your hands, so I've got Biff, Adam, Nathan, Amy so far. Go ahead.
Yeah, Nathan brings up a really good point. So if we have so many schools, I guess a certain percent of the population of students that are out, I don't know what that number would be. I mean, how would we figure out, is 80% enough? Do we go down to 75? Do we go up to 90? How do we come up with that number? I guess I don't know how we do that.
And I would also say, because even though some of you, a lot of you are teachers, you're not engaged in the administration end of it day in and day out. If you want to include language that says that is discretionary, certainly we can talk about, at the discretion of the superintendent or the administration or whatever. We're certainly, there's no reason we can't have that conversation as part of this. Okay, Adam?
I had raised my hand before you reminded us that we would be turning to external metrics. I think it is so imperative that we have to look at those. We can't exit this conversation without going back to those, because that is what is determining our staffing levels.
Right, and I promise you we're going to do that. Nathan?
Well, our externals are going to be correlated with our internals, right? And so if our statistics are crazy in the city, like we're seeing them now, we're going to have more staff out. And that's why we have 5 schools closed. And so, I mean, we can set our internals because we can control the internals, but we can't control like Southwest District Health adding a purple category, which some states have done because their red is so terrible. And so if we set up our internals so that they adequately reflect the externals, I think that may be beneficial.
And I'll just share with you information that I've received today in a completely other conversation. We are going to, I mean, just count on it. We will have post-Thanksgiving spikes, big. We will have post-Christmas spikes. We will have post-New Year spikes. We're almost certainly on the low end right now. That's just, there's not an epidemiologist out there that thinks otherwise, just for what it's worth. Amy?
Hi, I'll try to be brief and concise, but I just knowing that there's not a one size fits all for these metrics. What I'm trying as a parent, I would love to see us identify, because from when the time this committee was formed to now, we've had an organic closure, right? We didn't need a metric to, when we did, there wasn't any staff to support it. And so five schools have closed down. But in the meantime, how do we support, whether we're in red or orange, if kids are in quarantine and at least within the Nampa school district or with the Lone Star, if they're in quarantine, they don't get any instruction, right? Because unless they're online, which they are now, because they were forced to, but if in a hybrid, they don't have any instruction, right? And I don't know if that's across the board or just at Lone Star. With our technology, it would be great, even if it's a listen only mode. As a parent, I'm just speaking as a parent, I know for teachers, it would be very difficult to have to see little kids on the screen and kids in the classroom. So that was one takeaway for me, is just being able to incorporate the technology for those that have to quarantine. But then also, how do we support kiddos that can't not be at school? Because I know a lot of you teachers are concerned about kiddos that need to be inside the classroom. And so I could keep my kids at home for the whole rest of the year and they would be fine. But there are some kids that don't have that option. So I don't know how to work that into the metric. But as we have 40 minutes left, I just wanted to say that piece of it.
Okay, thank you. Just for, again, what it's worth, I take us back to the board's motion, which ultimately doesn't include a lot of the stuff that we want to get into. You know, there's a lot of stuff here that we want, and maybe the board will come back and say, you know what, this was a great group, and we'd like to engage you further on some other issues. I could easily see something like that happening, but the task at hand, and yeah, we're down to 34 minutes. The task at hand is identify the metrics for movement into hybrid and remote. That's our task. And somehow we're going to have to just focus on that for the next 20 minutes and get there. So there are multiple connected issues here. I think I saw Nathan's hand go up.
Yeah. Which, for what it's worth, I do think it would be great if we could maybe send a recommendation along Amy's lines, just saying, hey, we talked about this. It's not part of our formal metric recommendation, but we feel like these are important issues that the board should consider.
And one of the things that I will be happy to do when we get to finished our task is invite each of you to provide me with additional thoughts. You've now spent hours and hours and hours getting information, talking this through. I don't want that to go to waste. I want, and I don't think there's any problem with providing that insight to the board. And so when we're done here, you all have my email address. Send me a statement that says, in addition to these metrics, these are things that we feel strongly about that the board needs to consider.
And then at that point, I feel like we've said quite a bit about the internal metrics. Do we need to vote on what we think the metrics should be or something like that?
Yes. So I'm going to ask you on the 15% staff availability. Is that the number you want to go with? And again, I'm not going to use Robert's rules, but if you have, but what I heard was when staff availability hits 85% or 15% unavailable, that school should close. Yes, Eric?
So are we talking about across the district or across or school specific? Because those are two very different numbers.
What I've heard is, correct me if I'm wrong, and you're the committee, that it's school to school.
Okay.
So 15% for high schools to 20% possibly in elementary schools, kind of like our school district already has, because 15% in a high school is 11 to 14 teachers out, depending on the high school. And then 20% for elementary, I don't know exactly how many, but having 11 to 4, that many teachers out in a high school can be pretty bad.
I saw, what is that?
Sorry, 4 to 5 teachers in an elementary school is 20%.
Okay.
And yes, that's very difficult.
So are we ready to vote on this internal metric? Kyler.
I would suggest that we leave that to the school. Right now they have the ability to close a school. I think that we leave it to them, because who's to say that a week from now they don't say, you know what, a substitute can come between these two classes and they can be online with their teacher, and so we need less, we could go to 20%, or we need to back that down to 10%. I think giving them the flexibility right now, they have a system that, at least to me, appears to work very well for shutting down an individual school. I think that our metric could be better served to say what number of schools before they shut down the district.
Okay, I serve at the pleasure of the committee. We're going to, and I think we've heard a very profitable conversation. Let me do this. All those in favor of leaving the decision regarding staffing and when to close a school to the discretion of the administration as it currently is done, raise your hand. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. Okay, so we have a very strong yes vote on that. So what we have agreed is to leave that metric in the hands of the administration. Do you want to talk about student attendance as a metric? Okay. Is there a number that you want to start with? A percentage?
Less than 80% is a possibility, because once we get 1 in 4 kids being gone, trying to do both online and hybrid, and those kids out in quarantine and keeping up with all the things that are going on, gets teachers stretched out all different ways. And so trying to make sure we get all those kids caught up at the same time can get pretty taxing after a while.
So there's that's 80% attendance. When you fall below that, you move to what?
Remote, online.
Let me ask again the sense of the group. Are we going to end up basically saying, leaving it to the discretion of the administration, or are we going to set a hard number here? Brooke?
Sorry.
It's okay. Brooke?
So I was actually waving to a staff member who had to leave, but I will, I guess, throw in here that I do think that it has to be done by the administration at each school, because I do not believe that we have the accurate numbers per school.
Okay.
Or I don't.
So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you all with regard to school attendance. How many of you want to leave that again to the discretion of the administration? Raise your hand. Okay.
Well, I have a question. I have a question about that before I vote.
Sure,
I suppose.
sure.
Did we say that the 80% is what the administration uses, or is that what we're proposing?
Eric, do you know that?
Sorry, say again.
Do you know what the administration, what the district is currently using for attendance before they shut a school down?
I'm not aware that the district is using student attendance as a metric for closing individual schools down at this point.
Does anybody want me to inquire of the district? I think they are listening in.
I'm almost certain that they are not using that as a metric.
Okay.
I think that would be an important thing to note before a vote.
Okay.
I would tell you that I'm sorry, it was not included on the list of things that Dr. Russell sent to me as the considerations that they are using to close individual schools. That was not on the list.
Okay, so I'm going to guess that, and if there's someone from the district administration who can either pop on or message on the chat. Yes, Kyler.
I just wonder if sort of a belt and suspenders approach to this, if we don't say, and I have no problem with 80%. Frankly, that is a number to me and carries no value. I don't know the impact of that. So I wonder if we don't say 80% or a value to be determined by, whether that's the school district, if they want to change that, leave that, just leave a more open recommendation for them.
So I guess my question back is there any value in even saying 80% at that point, or just saying?
The only value I see in it is that the teachers who are on here have suggested that, and when it was suggested, I saw lots of vigorous head shaking. I think that gives them an indication that this is where we would suggest. If you have reason to change it, change it. That gives them, obviously this is just a suggestion and the board can do what they want with it. They can change it, of course. So I don't know that there's value in it. That's maybe that's the ever the politician in me.
Nathan?
I think if we're going to say a number, it should be the number, or else it pretty much loses value once we leave it to administration. If we say
it's either discretionary or it's not.
Yeah, if we say the teachers really feel like 20% of their kids being gone adds a ton of work, and so we should just go online, then that should be the number, and we should go online for any school that hits that number. I mean,
And
if we need to
remember,
change the number, we change the number, but
we're making a recommendation that the board will consider and will have input, I'm sure, from the administration during the meeting. And so it's a recommendation. I saw, Brooke, did I see your hand? Or were you waving goodbye? Okay. Let me try this. There was not a consensus on leaving it to the discretion of the administration. Let me try this one. How many of you would be in favor of setting an 80% threshold for attendance, at which point, if you drop below 80%, you move to remote as a school? Okay, is that clear? Yes, Nathan? You're just raising your hand, yes. Okay.
I'm voting, yeah, sorry.
Okay, everybody in favor of that, raise your hand. 80% attendance is the threshold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We have a majority. Yes, Biff?
I guess I have a question about that. Is there a duration for that, or is it we have one day where we hit 80 and then all of a sudden we pull the plug and the next day we'd have people back? How do we do that?
Nathan?
What I suggested in the document was either a 1 or 2 week period where if we have a sustained 80%, that is when we would go online. Usually I would say 1 week, but since we're only seeing the kids twice a week, I'm not sure 2 days is enough. I think we need to say 2 weeks of sustained 80%.
So you got A, 80% sustained attendance level, and then B, how long do you stay in remote before you come back? Do you, I mean, because you're tracking.
Yeah, one other thing I put in the document was any single school shutdown should be 2 weeks unless there is an extenuating circumstance. So if we shut them down because of attendance, it's 2 weeks and then we're back, unless we have a reason to stay online.
What I'm prepared to do is one more vote and count the vote and report that, okay? So the issue is if attendance falls below 80% for, is it 1 week or 2? For 2 weeks. If attendance falls below 80% for 2 weeks, that school goes to remote, also for 2 weeks minimum. All in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Keep your hands up. 10, 11. Okay, we have a strong majority on that one. Are there any other internal, we're down to 20 minutes. Are there any other internal metrics that you want to consider before we go to external? Yes, Biff?
Sorry. I guess I just thought about it. What have we been running on average for attendance before COVID? I just want to make sure that, I mean, if we're running close to like 85% and now COVID hits and we dip below that, I mean, I guess that would be a big thing.
I think at this point, I don't I don't think we have that information. And my recommendation is this. We're making a recommendation. It has some specifics to it. You might want to attend the board meeting at which this is discussed and weigh and be heard. I think that would be a pretty, I would think that would be good. Yeah, Nathan?
I just wanted to let Biff know I just did a quick research, and the National Center for Education Statistics shows a very strong average across the country at 92% attendance. So that's a pretty standard year, is 92.
Okay. Do we want to consider any other internal metrics before we move on? And we're, yes, Chandra.
I just have a point of clarification. So if I'm correct, we are going to make a specific metric for student attendance, but not for staff, which, I mean, it seems like throughout this document and through the chat, it seems like everybody has been saying that internal metrics are the most important to us and not external metrics, and that we're closing schools. The schools that are already closed are because of staff measures. So it seems a little backward to me that we would put something hard in stone about student absences when that is not actually why we're closing schools right now. I understand that schools are already using their own numbers for the 15 or 20%. But if we're not reporting that information to parents, I don't know, I'm going to be quite frank, I don't know if I trust individual schools to make this decision on their own when we have, I don't even know if I trust Southwest District Health. Southwest District Health is putting people on their webinars that are saying you don't need to wear a mask. So I just want a point of clarification on that. It seems a little backward that we're not making it.
The clarification is that I think you're right, that that's what we've just decided, that we're going to leave, that the district will determine staffing levels at which point a school will be closed. But we've also recommended that attendance levels at 80% will trigger an online move, and that is what we've just decided. As far as who we trust and that kind of thing, again, we're getting into, I mean, that's a fair issue, and I would encourage you to make a statement or a comment to that effect that I will include in the report to the board. And I want to, we're back quickly running out of time. Kim?
I was just going to say, I think we decided the 15 to 20% because that's the metric that the school district was already using for the previous closings. So I think what we were saying is we like the metric that they used for the 5 previous closings because of staff shortage. So if we need to put that in our document and say what this 15 to 20% that you used in the shutting down of these last previous 5 schools, if we need to say that, then we can say that.
Okay. Eric?
Well, just for clarification, the district always makes that final decision as to whether or not the school should be closed. The building administrators do have input, but ultimately it's the district that makes that final decision.
And that's probably not going to change regardless of how this, I mean, there is always going to be a certain level of discretion, right? And we don't want to ultimately take all that away. Can we move on to external metrics? Okay. Southwest District, Kyler?
Hey, before we move on to external metrics, and I apologize for dragging it out, do we want to establish a number of schools that need to close before we just close the district?
I see heads nodding. You want to throw out a number?
I don't know how many schools there are. Again, that to me, that will have no value more than a number. I'd love to hear from the teachers some of their thoughts.
There's roughly it's like 28 to 30 school buildings if you include gym prep and whatnot within the district. So 1 in 6 would be 5 schools. 1 in 5 would be 6 schools. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I would go somewhere in that. To me, hearing that there's 5 schools already shut down, to me that sounds extreme, and you're losing value in keeping it open. You're pushing the subs from sick schools to healthy school. Like to me, that sounds reasonable.
Eric?
Yeah, there are 24 actual school buildings in the district.
If we were to set the target, the threshold at 5, what you're saying is essentially if one more school were to close tomorrow, we would be recommending that the entire district go online, right? Yes, Amy?
Yeah, Kyler, help me understand. It seems a little bit like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So if we're, what are you thinking about why we would want to close everybody down as kind of like, I don't say a punishment, but just help me understand what your thinking behind that is.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. For me, the thought is simply that at some point you're going to be transitioning to having the teachers coming from the substitutes that would be attending 6 schools that were attending schools that had issues yesterday, now being transitioned to the healthy school. I think at some point you're pushing that. That's my thought there, and that's just a thought. I have no data to back that. So,
Eric?
Well, and I think the other issue there is that you have families with children in more than one school setting, right? And so the issue is that we have 5 schools closed, and 3 of them right now are elementaries, right? But there's no guarantee, there's no way of knowing whether you're actually, if you're shutting down elementaries, but you're not shutting down secondaries, and so those secondary students can't stay home, unless their parents require them to stay home. Those secondary students aren't staying home to watch those kids, then we've still got a significant childcare problem there. So that's why I think it's at some point it lessens the chaos if you send that across the board.
And I'll repeat something that Kyler has said a couple of times. Ultimately, these are numbers that we're kind of picking out of the air, and so they're really, this isn't rocket science. It's we're doing our best to make the best recommendation we can given the assignment we've been given. So Brooke, I think I missed you earlier. Did you have okay? Nathan?
Yeah, I think the 5 schools is an indicator that we are struggling. And if we end up giving a recommendation to move fully online at that point, that opens up our buildings for, if the board decides to provide childcare for healthcare workers, do some of those sorts of things 5 days a week. And so 5 seems like a good number that we have a serious issue on our hands. That is if it's 1 or 2, those schools can shut down and reopen, no problem. But 5 or more is a lot.
Brooke?
So are we saying just for 2 weeks that would happen for 2 weeks, that we would close and go fully online for 2 weeks at that point? Is that what we're saying? Once we have 5, then it's just 2 weeks and then we reopen? And I'm just asking because I think that would get a bit cloudy, right? Like the 5th one closes and then we're online for 2 weeks. And when does that end? Because I think that's a really big thing, is that if we're going to do that for 2 weeks, I got it. Lone Star went online today. It seemed pretty seamless. We have 2 at the high school, but is it 2 weeks and then everything reopened? That'd be the question.
Is it 2 weeks?
I think we need to have an external metric that talks about when we reopen. So use our internal metrics to tell us when to shut down, and our external to tell us, if our cases start downward trending, then that can say reopen. Or we have a separate metric that says, hey, all of our staff is healthy again. Let's, we only have 2% of staff in quarantine. Let's reopen the schools, something like that.
Okay. I got some positive body language there. Anybody else want to comment before I try to bring this to a vote? So this vote is, is it 5 or more schools are closed based on the metrics that are already in place or recommended, then that would trigger a shutdown of, or not a shutdown, but an online only or remote learning for two weeks, or to be determined by metrics that we're about to talk about external metrics that we're about to discuss. I know that's really confusing, but that's that's kind of what I heard. Does anybody want to try to clarify that for me, Kyler?
Yeah, I fear my clarification is just going to confuse it a little bit more. I think there needs to be some defined overlap of the 5 closures. My concern is if school A closes Monday of this week, and school 5, how about that? A and 5, look at me. Closes Friday of the next week. You now have 5 schools closed, but by a day. I think there needs to, maybe it's if 5 schools are closed for an overlapping week, or something along those lines to say definitively this is a problem. I think that if you have 5 that stretch out over a 2-week period, you're dealing with the problem. You're meeting the needs of the problem at that point.
Okay, so what that would look like would be if 5 or more schools are closed for a week or more.
Overlapping.
Yeah, an overlapping, yeah, something.
But does it need to be the same 5 schools? So it can be one school on a Monday, 3 different schools. I mean, it still seems very yo-yoing for everyone.
So the schools will close for a 2-week span. So anytime 5 schools are going to close for 1 week of those 2-week spans, then it triggers it.
So the question would be, so let's say one school closes on Monday, 2 schools close on Wednesday. When you get to that 5, and if you stay at 5 for a week, whatever the 5, if one falls off but another comes on, if it stays at 5, is that what you're saying?
So I think that you can even simplify it. Say if 5 of them are triggered in a week. Simple as that, because then those 5 will overlap for at least 1 week. If 5 of them cross that threshold in a given week, then you're there.
And the district is not closing schools on like a Monday. It closes down on Tuesday. The district has been very consistent in closing down either over the weekend or on that Wednesday break. So I think we're going to be able to see that.
Does anybody want to do better than I did at trying to phrase this issue now that we're down to 7 minutes left in our meeting? Go ahead, Nathan.
If 5 schools enter shutdown due to our previous metrics and their shutdowns overlap for a period of a week, then we go to an entire district online.
For 2 weeks.
For 2 weeks or determined by the next metric.
The external metric, so it could be
a minimum of 2 weeks. It could be
longer based on if what we're about to talk about. Does everyone understand what we're about to vote on? Any other questions before I ask for hands? I'm really glad that this is being recorded so I can go back and write this stuff down. Okay, all in favor of that position, that recommendation, please raise your hand. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We have a majority. And that's how I'll write the recommendation, okay? Let me ask you this. We're not going to get this external metric solved in 5 minutes. Do I have your permission to go to 6:45? Okay.
Unfortunately, I have to leave it. I have a hard stop for a work commitment.
I'm sorry. I'm running through this as quick as I can. So let me see how far we can get. External metric. The easy answer to this is metrics that currently exist, the colors provided by the district. Yes, Brooke?
So I think one of the things that we do have to take into account, and I hear this a lot, right? Like the public has to be responsible or schools have to stay closed, but I think there's a lot of responsibility in a lot of cases going on in the public. So I do believe that part of what we have to pay attention to are the state guidelines. Because green may never be a real metric. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I pray that it is, but I do think we have to determine if we're not in a shutdown. I spent a couple of hours on the phone with the governor's office to even understand this stage 2 because it's so different than our previous stage 2, just because I'm a business owner. But I do think we have to take that into account because we're always going to be our own ecosystem if other ecosystems are allowed to function, where when we shut down the first time, we were able to control that red, whatever color we were in. So I just want to throw that out there that I do think it should be considered as an outside metric.
So let me throw this out to you as an observation of having as an Idahoan. Everything we're doing here has a political aspect to it. I mean, it's hard. It's virtually impossible to separate the politics from what we're doing. But that is particularly true when it comes to the governor's office. I mean, that process, I think, is more fraught politically than it might be in the individual districts. That it may not matter. We may want to go ahead and include the governor's declarations as part of this, but I think
we could even take that out of it. I'm just concerned about the other community metrics, right? Because we're doing all these other things that I had a woman who had to go bury her mom and she came back with COVID. They couldn't hold the body anymore. Do you see what I'm saying? There's all these outside metrics that if we're not fully closed down, that will continue to affect us. So maybe take governor out of it. I'm just throwing it out there that I do think it matters because that's why we're seeing that community spread, knowing it's not coming from our schools. So if we just close our school and the community continues to rise, when do we take the fact that the community's functioning, people are working? I just think that does matter here. I didn't need to bring governor. I'm just saying the community.
Fair point. I'm gonna toss this out because I'm a genius and I'm reading it from Kyler. Here's a starting point. To reopen, you have to have 3 weeks back in orange. Now I've lost it.
I can speak for myself, Roger, if that's all right.
Well, you wrote it so well. Go ahead.
No. So my only thought was just throwing out a starting point for us, and the again, numbers are numbers, and we either get back to orange or have 3 weeks of consistent decline.
Questions on that, Nathan?
Well, I just wanted to say that we can talk numbers, and I threw one out there, but I haven't seen a chart yet where we had consistent downward numbers and it was a little bit, we're either going up or we're going down.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I think we can say consistent downward decline, and that is sufficient.
And take out the 3 weeks.
No. 3 weeks of consistent downward decline. I don't think we need to
Rather
say
than a
5% decline or something like
Oh,
that.
I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Other comments before I ask for it? Yes. Amy, did I see your hand?
She was waving
She
goodbye.
was just waving goodbye.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Adam. I see you, Samantha. Adam, Samantha, then Eric.
I was just gonna echo Kyler in his mention of orange, and I was just thinking that we can't ignore not only the health risks, but what the medical professionals told us at our meeting on Tuesday. We're about to enter a grim period, and so we should not be we should definitely be paying attention to declines in cases. Obviously, like they mentioned, we're in a vertical curve. So what I'm proposing we look at is what the Southwest District Health had put forward, which was case numbers, percent positivity, and hospitalization rates. And that's what they used to determine those green, yellow, orange, red. And I don't think we need to necessarily discuss at this point what green or yellow look like. It's more about what brings us from online. And that would be, I don't know if that coincides with being in red or not, but it certainly seems it would be. And exiting red would then, it seems to me, exit remote as was put forth by those guidelines.
I would encourage the group to I would encourage you to agree on using existing metrics as opposed to having some separate set tracked. Regardless of how you feel about the district, there are metrics there that I think you don't want to recreate. Let me get to Samantha next.
So my thought is I want to agree with Kyler, Nathan, and Adam to some degree, but also using the Southwest Health District metrics with those external numbers. When we're a school system of 5 to 17-year-olds, I think that that's something that we should be recommending they narrow down the scope, because we're thinking about the kids, like providing education for these kids. And if they're not the ones getting it, and if our staff isn't the ones that are getting it on a regular basis on this downward or upward trend, we've got to pay attention to that. If we're closing the schools down just at that point and that conjecture, just because the community around is going in that direction. I think we need to really consider also the impact of COVID on these kids. If they're not getting it and our staff is quarantined and that's why we're closing schools, they don't have it, we need to consider those pieces to that puzzle.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
First was a question of clarification. What we're saying is a downward trend and we're in orange, right? We're not replacing orange with a downward trend. Is that, that was just a point of clarification on.
You could see, because you could see a downward trend in red and it would
Correct.
still be good.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I was going to say in response to Samantha is that we are a school district of children, but we are also a school district of adults. We have nearly 1,400 employees of the school district. We do need to pay attention to the fact that our adults are getting the virus in the community as well. So both of those things should be factored into it, especially since it's those adults that drive instruction.
There has been some conversation on the chat about whether you use the district-wide numbers or numbers that are specific to Nampa. I'm not familiar with whether the district breaks those out by color. Maybe they do, so that Nampa is segregated from the rest of the district. Is there any feeling on that one way or the other? The one thing I would offer is, I'm sure none of you stays permanently within the Nampa city limits. So for what it's worth, Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, it seems really easy to have them put Nampa on it. And since we're Nampa, it just seems to make sense since it's simple. If it was difficult, I'd say just use the county, but they already have that. And I think what Kyler was actually saying was or downward trend, which we can have a discussion on that. I just think he was saying either if we go to orange, boom, we're back in hybrid, or if there's a 3-week downward trend and it looks like we're coming out of the red, we go back in hybrid. That's what he was trying to say.
So my question to that is simply, it's conceivable and probably likely at some point that when we get to high spikes where we're in red, and you could see a 3-week downward trend still in red. It would not, and so would you at that point go back to hybrid if you're still in red, but you've seen a downward trend for 3 weeks? I think that's entirely likely coming soon. Kyler?
I would propose yes. I think go back to what the district health officials told us yesterday. Watch the trends. I think that, and again, at the end of the day, the school district can say, we like this until we don't, right? They can say, hey, you know what? Red is at 5% and we're at 15. Man, we're not going to open back up. They're going to make an intelligent decision. But I think that if we say these are the two metrics and it's or, I apologize. My kid's wonderful. That's one of my kids that doesn't go to school.
Okay. So yes, Adam. And then
So
Tim.
when we're talking about downward trend, are we talking about case numbers and percent positivity and hospitalization rates? Because that is what those are the metrics that are used for the red to orange, orange to red. I think that those things are what the medical professionals were telling us to pay very close attention to, especially in this period we're about to enter.
Or you could, there are a number of things you can do. You can again leave it to the discretion, whatever, to define what a downward trend is to the board or the administration. Kim and then Kyler.
Yeah, I was a little scared on the downward trend because obviously what we're going to see and what we're going to recommend is hopefully we go remote after these holiday seasons. And we need to make sure we put that in there because I think that was I can't say it's all, but I think a lot of people understand where we're going, but we need to know we're going to go way up here. And if we start seeing a downward trend, we're right here right now. If we go up and we have a downward trend, we're still right here and we're where we're at right now. And right now we're having issues. So I think we need to understand, is it the positivity rates? Is it the number of cases? Are we being overloaded? Because what's happening is we're gonna go up and we're gonna go back right now and we're having issues right now where we're at and we're gonna go up after this. So if we see a downward trend, do we need to go past where we are at right now? So go past this percent positivity rate, go past where we are at right now where we're having issues. So past before this date and we went into the red, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Brooke?
Maybe we just use the metrics we've already discovered because we've been open for a little while. So maybe what we do is we say, whatever metric we were at 2 weeks ago, we weren't having closures, things were good. When we reach that metric, we do everything we can to get back into hybrid. We don't need to keep reinventing the wheels. We're like 2020 is never ending, guys, ever. So now that we're there, we know we did okay a couple weeks ago. That's the metric. We know we're functioning all right now, right? Like we're doing what we have to, parents, teachers, everybody. So maybe what we say is, okay, a couple weeks ago when numbers were here, so maybe that's orange, or like right when we hit red, whatever. But if we get past this threshold where we have to close, then we need to consistently be, down below those. And maybe that puts us right back into orange, and that's the answer. Like, I just don't, I get it. I do want us to take a look, and I do believe we have to take a look, right? Because the reason community spread is going to get bigger is because the community is not closed. That is a reality. We have to face that. That's not what happened in phase 2. And I don't know if it's going to, because there is a huge economic worry. There just is. And so maybe that's what we say is here's where we were functioning fine. We weren't faced with these issues prior to this number. That's the number where we go back hybrid. Suggestion, total suggestion. That was my serious tone. Total suggestion.
Brooke, I'll just add this. It's going to get better. I promise. Nathan?
Just a reminder that our internal metrics will catch this, right? So if there's a downward trend and we end up higher than we currently are, we're going to see that we don't have the ability to reopen our schools because we're going to have so many staff in there. So our internal metrics will help us, even if we are downward trending for 3 weeks, we may not be able to reopen because of our other metrics. And so if we downward trend past that, that's when we can reopen.
Good point. Adam?
I was just going to agree with Brooke on the point she was making that 2 weeks ago we were in orange, and it was when we entered the high levels in red that we began to have problems. I think this was something that was foreseen by the Southwest District Health when they made those recommendations.
Okay, where are we at? What do you want to? Do you want to go back to Tyler's original proposal, Nathan?
It seems like maybe the easiest solution is do a quick vote and say, maybe we just stay online until we hit orange and see what people think about that. And if people don't like that, then find another solution.
I'm trying to read the room here. What you're saying is a simple metric. If you go to red, that go ahead.
Use the other metrics to shut down. Our metric to reopen is if we go to orange.
To reopen after the holidays?
To reopen after any online.
Okay.
After any closure, if a closure has been triggered, the opening trigger would be getting to orange.
Yes,
That was the trigger at the beginning of the school year.
correct. So voting to have that be our trigger to reopen.
Would that be regardless of where the internal metrics are at that point, or that would be taken into account?
Most of the
I don't think that's
internal
going to
metrics
be
you can't
a
measure
conflict.
at that point.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a conflict though, because if we get down to orange, we're going to be able to open our schools.
Okay. Other thoughts, Brooke?
Well, I would just say, I get that was where the initial metric was, but maybe this is part of the growing process that the community has to see and understand. Like, this is what red looks like, and it's hard for us to function. And we have to have that grace. Like, the community is watching. I get messages all the time, but when we're in red, we're seeing the infrastructure problems. And when we see those infrastructure problems, I think the community grasps that, understands that, and we want to take a look at that and say, okay, great. We're going to do all we can to stay open if we're at this closure rate, right? And I'm hoping that we say some targeted things. Like I said, I think Biff really spoke to me in this whole thing, but then we know we're doing okay in orange, that's the metric. But what we're saying now is we see it, we get it, we're going to do all we can, but that's the orange. I'm saying that more for the community's benefit. Maybe we all get it now, and that's okay.
Here's what we're going to vote on. The reopening metric will be the return to orange for Nampa as tracked by the Southwest District. Okay. All in favor of that, raise your hand. Strong majority.
Can I hear why? I would really like to hear what Kyler has to say. Can I ask? Sorry, I really enjoy the content. I'm sorry. I know everybody wants to get off. I just would like to know. I don't want to miss anything.
No, my objection to that is very simple. That I think that there is value in opening as soon as we can, and I think that the trend can measure that. And again, I think that maybe it's 2 of the 3 metrics lowering for a consistent 3-week period, and not over 1.5 times what orange is. Or I think waiting until orange, man, we could be waiting until April.
I understand that.
And yeah, I support the vote, and I'm happy to lose. Absolutely.
No, but I do want to understand that, because I don't know, right? And I do know that there's other morbidities in the community. So I appreciate it. I really do, Kyler. Thank you.
I don't want to rush us into a close. We've got 2 more hands that I want to recognize, Adam and Melissa. But where we are at right now is we have approved 3 metrics, 2 internal, 1. Basically, we've approved an existing metric with discretion to the administration, the school district administration, we've approved an attendance metric internal, and we've approved a reopening metric, which is orange. That's what we've done.
I believe we actually did 3 internal metrics. The schools can close based on teachers not being available based on their current metrics. Schools can close based on attendance. School district can close based on number of schools closed.
You're
And then
correct.
reopen.
The 5 school, I forgot, I left out the 5 schools. I do have it here.
Okay.
Okay, Adam, Melissa, Adam first.
I was just going to echo or reply to Brooke saying that maybe the community will have a greater understanding of what's happening after seeing discussions like these. And I also think that this board has shown a lot of compromise, because we had, through discussion on the doc and tonight, decided on closing based on internal metrics, and then reopening versus with external metrics. So I don't know. I think that's compromise.
I just want to say before Melissa speaks, this has been very impressive. What you all have done. I wish other districts and other groups and organizations would do this, because regardless of the outcome, this has been the fact that other people have been able to watch this and learn from it, and you've been serious and thoughtful is very impressive. Melissa?
It really quickly was pointed out in the chat that we did not vote on external metrics for closing the district. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that from the chat.
We decided that our internal metrics would reflect the external metrics, so we voted on internal metrics to close us down.
Right.
That's my understanding. Melissa?
Well, this is kind of in response to Kyler, because I came into this group staunchly keep the schools open. Just, whatever needs to happen, keep them open. And I still believe that. Learning the new information I have from the substitute side of things, as far as physically not having the bodies to keep the schools open. And then also specifically responding to Kyler as far as that red, while it has always seemed kind of arbitrary a little bit, it seems like that has been the threshold of we can't keep the bodies in the schools. Even though it seems disconnected as far as that's the Southwest District Health compared to the school district, it seems like Adam pointed out, when we started really falling apart as a school district, it's kind of when we hit that red, just because the number of people and all of the requirements for teachers to quarantine themselves because of this, that, or the other. And something that, I've been thinking so much about, just especially in these last couple of days since we met last, was, if we have these teachers who are seemingly healthy, who can teach our kids 4 days a week instead of 2, is it as valuable as being in person? No. But at least they're interacting with their teacher and getting instruction, and not just maybe worksheets or arbitrary assignments that a teacher can come up with from someone like me, who I might know how to help them, but I might be in a calculus class and I can't help them. And so, there are so many things that have to weigh out. And I just feel like I've been able to gather that information, and really that arbitrary threshold of red seems to be when things just fell apart. So
thank you.
That's my 10 cents, I guess.
Samantha, thank you. I see you, Samantha. Let me just say, I think when this is all said and done, this year's going to have to get redone. There's going to be learning that didn't happen that should have happened. There are going to be, experiences that didn't happen, and it's an extraordinary once in a century experience. And there are some things that we can't fix. So we're trying, I think you're all trying to get through this the best you can. This is impossible to do it just right. Samantha?
The only thing that I don't remember if we voted on this or said this or stated it somewhere, but in our document, we stated somewhere that we wanted these metrics and decisions to be for the remainder of the school year, and not so that teachers and parents and students and everything were getting jostled. Was that somewhere that I just missed it, or can we put that in there that these metrics are what we are using till June 2021?
That we have not stated that specifically, but that has been the understanding under which I've been operating. Unless there's and again, the district can say nah, right? The board can say whatever it wants to say, but the recommendation that I will turn in will be the recommendation for the remainder of the school year, unless there's a strong objection somewhere here.
Consistency, please.
I will write up a document and send it out to you all. It won't be tonight, but I'll write up a document. I will ask for your review to make sure that it's accurate. And then I will ask you also, when you respond, to provide me any additional commentary that you would like to submit to the board on your own behalf. Okay? Samantha?
One last thing. Is this going to go into effect post-Thanksgiving?
Yeah,
or are we suggesting that this go into effect as soon as possible? Do you know what
that has not been, that's not part of our charge. That's
okay.
Specifically up to the board to decide how. They've asked us to make recommendations without specifying that question.
Perfect. Thank you.
I have heard that they're going to do a board meeting on Tuesday to potentially review this recommendation.
My understanding is that I will be essentially presenting this to the board on Tuesday.
Yeah, and I think that we came to a consensus kind of that we would suggest, I think Jana just put that in there, that we would close after Thanksgiving would be our suggestion. We can't ask the board to do that. That's up to them to choose to do that. But I think that is something that we suggested as a committee, that because we see the numbers where we are, that this is when it should probably start.
And I would, again, that's the kind of commentary that I would send back to me that I can add to what I submit to the district. And I would encourage you to attend the meeting if you can. I believe it's scheduled for noon on Tuesday. But you know, you're certainly welcome to. I would encourage you to attend. Any final thoughts before we have a cocktail?
Did you say noon on Tuesday?
That's what I have been told.
Oh, I think we're all in school at that time. Well, at least I will be.
That's the last I heard was noon on Tuesday. It could, and I have not been officially invited yet. That's the word I got. Yes, Derek?
I was just wondering if there's any way that maybe Eric, we could get that changed so we can attend or be present.
I don't have any control over when the board has their meetings. I can certainly request it, but
again, I would, if you want to contact the board chair and make that position known, I would encourage you to do so.
And Roger, is your assumption that this special board meeting that they're going to have, not special, but the board meeting, is just about what we have recommended?
I don't know that.
Okay.
Everyone, thank you so much. It has been worthwhile, and I think we got important work done. Please review the document that I send you and make sure that I've got it right. And next time in Nampa, I'll look you up. Thank you, everyone.